Okay, hi, and welcome everybody to Bloom. This is our final episode in this series, and I'm so excited to have everybody here with us. We are going to jump right in. So I want to, again, always introduce our co-host. She is from Circle. Again, check out Circle. They have been doing such an amazing job adding so many cool features specifically for internal communicators. And so Crean, say hi. Crean's from Circle. She is our
Hello, everyone. Hello, ICPros. How's everyone today? Hope you're all doing great.
So today we have kind of two parts to this, and this all came about because if you remember a couple shows ago, I totally screwed up the breakout room feature on Zoom. I was so excited to use it because I crave to actually dive deeper into subjects and to really solve problems of these things, and I usually do in-person sort of mastermind type events, and of course those have all been canceled. So I've been dying to just get into smaller groups and to really again solve some deeper problems at a deeper level. And Rachel is with us from Paycor, and she was so kind to raise her hand and say, hey, I know a few things about Zoom. So we hopped on a separate call, and she was taking me, through some things. And I just thought that her tips would be helpful to a larger audience, since we are all trying to plan engaging events for our employees. So that led us to talk about lots of other things, like should we be doing peer circles and smaller groups and holding each other accountable to get that comms plan done. And it just sort of led into this really wonderful, rich conversation. So a couple things before we toss to Rachel. She had said, yeah, my boss came to me and said, we need a comms plan by July 1. So she asked me, do you have one, or do you have any templates? And so that's what led us to kind of this ask give. Like, I asked for help on events. Rachel's giving it to me, and then now she asked for help on comms planning, and now we're going to give that to her at the second part of our show today. So we've got 5 really great templates that we're going to give everybody. They're so good, so well done. And then that's going to kind of conclude our time for this series. And then we're going to send a survey to everybody that's kind of been with us through Bloom, and because we really want to know where to direct the internal comms pro, their planning team, our attention. What sort of structures and programming and things should we be planning? So we'll send the link to that survey. I know surveys can kind of be a little bit of a time suck, so I hope it will only take a few minutes. You'll be entered to win an Amazon card if you fill it in and give us your thoughts, but we really want to know what we can do to kind of get beyond maybe just high level fluffy kind of stuff that we might get on just generic webinars, and to really, like, what can our collective be and do specifically to help internal communicators kind of move forward. So heads up, that's how today is going to roll. Gina's going to keep our time, our producer. Gina, would you like to say hi? She's new on the internal comms pro team.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. I was here for the last Bloom episode that we had. And like Sarah said, I'll be keeping track of time. I'll also keep an eye out for any questions you might have. And I'm happy to be back.
All right. So with that, I'm going to toss to Rachel. Rachel, would you mind introducing yourself? And then I believe, are you going to be sharing your screen?
I actually wasn't going to today just because it's a lot for limited time, but I'm happy to do that in future breakouts and things of that nature. I was just going to kind of hit the bullets.
All right, let's do it. So tell us where you're from and a little bit about your role at Paycor, first of all, and how big Paycor is.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rachel Maley, formerly Foster. I just got married back in October, so I recognize some names. So just wanted to throw that out there in case you're like, oh, I think I know her. Name did recently change. I'm a senior communications and employee experience strategist at Paycor. It's a mouthful. I've been there for about 5 years now, and my background is actually in early childhood education, and then I got my master's in educational technology. So quite the switch, but it actually relates in some odd ways that you could probably guess what those things are, such as patience. So that's a little bit about me. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and then I went to Miami University. I met my now husband there, and so we landed in Cincinnati. And that's where we are today. Do you want me to dive right in, Sarah?
Let's do it. This is
Okay.
you know this group well enough. Let's just get right into it. Yep.
Perfect. Well, like Sarah mentioned, we hopped on a call and just kind of talked about Zoom best tips and tricks. And so I wanted to pull just kind of a handful of examples of things we've done at Paycor. Paycor is about 2,000 associates across the United States. And then we have a location in Serbia as well now. So internationally. And so I'm going to really hit on technology, design, and delivery today. And then there's so many things you can really do with Zoom. So we would need so much more time to dive into the nitty gritty, but I'm just going to kind of hit it high level and hope that you can take something away from today. So the first thing is technology. Like I said, we've been using Zoom. So we've been using Zoom for a little over a year now. So before coronavirus ever came through, we were using GoToMeeting and Webinar before that. And then we also have Microsoft Teams, but we primarily use Zoom for all of our video broadcasting. Some of our smaller teams use Teams for their meetings, but as a company, we're using Zoom. So the first thing with your technology is really making sure you have a good connection. So now that we're all at home, making sure that you check with your provider if your internet can even handle multiple devices going at once. So my husband's home right now, working from home. I'm home right now. If we were to broadcast like Netflix and something too, you would just want to make sure that your internet can handle all of that. So just double checking that piece. If you're video conferencing like how we're doing today, getting that wired connection is usually best case scenario. So if you can plug that Ethernet into your computer from your source, that's really going to help you not have that breakup, and it's going to keep your connection secure. These are things you probably already knew, but just wanted to hit those. The other thing to think about, especially as things are opening back up, is if you're going to broadcast to a really large audience, like we do it monthly for our associates. We've been doing a mix of live and then pre-recorded, but if I were to broadcast to everyone, avoiding those shared spaces is critical, because you just don't know how many people are going to be there that day. You probably can't hardwire in. So just thinking through some of those things. For your company or events, thinking through that platform you want to use, we go with Zoom because of all the engagement options that it has. So video is a big one. We're very big video. We like to see people's faces, see them smiling, see them nodding along. That was a really big thing for us. And so Zoom actually does that really well. So that's why I like Zoom. Zoom also has the breakout rooms, which Sarah mentioned. So I'll hit a little bit of webinar and meeting, but in the webinar, you don't have the breakout rooms. So thinking through your event, if you want to have that breakout room option, definitely keep it to a meeting over a webinar. But I will share something that Paycor did here in a second on how we did breakouts in a webinar. Screen share is another feature that Zoom has. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It's how Sarah's showing the screen right now. So really simple way to show up your PowerPoint or a video or whatever that is. Zoom keeps that pretty easy. Zoom also has chats, Q&A, and polling. So all great ways to keep your audience engaged. I love the screen that Sarah used at the beginning, just letting everyone know, hey, you're automatically muted. We've been doing a lot of, hey, throw in your favorite, quarantine purchase that you've made so that people will interact in the survey right away. Or I just attended a conference last week and they wanted us to introduce ourselves every time we joined into a session. So that was just a great way to know who's in your room with you, especially if you've never met before. And then another feature that we've actually just been starting to use a little more frequently is the annotation feature. So you would actually get to it the same way you would share a screen. You go down to that green share box, and then in your basic tab, it has the option for a whiteboard. And so that whiteboard comes up and it would look similar to, a blank Google Doc or a PowerPoint. And so everyone can actually annotate with you. So that's really great if you're in a breakout room and you're talking through something, or maybe, just a bunch of ideas are flowing out at one time and you can't keep up with them. It's a great way to kind of prevent everyone from talking over each other and getting it down on that piece of paper. and then it actually saves for you so that you can access it after that meeting is over. So just a great little feature that Zoom has. So I mentioned that Zoom has meeting and webinar. So webinar is what we are in today. Best use cases for webinar is when you're going to have a lot of participants. We use webinar at Paycor when we're doing our monthly broadcasts. So again, going back to that 2,000 people, we know that that's going to be a large meeting, right? We want everyone to be muted. We just want the host and panelists to be able to speak. But it's going to disconnect some of that engagement opportunity for those associates. So thinking through, the polling, if you want to use polling in advance, or recently we've been doing it for live Q&A with our executive team. So once a month we'll have a broadcast. We call it our Paycor Pulse, and then more recently we've called them Pulse Pours. And the reason for that is because right afterwards we set up 2 to 5 breakout rooms with our executives from that meeting, and they can hop into whichever one they want, or they can bounce around from whichever one they want. And we just use Zoom meeting for that after the webinar. So we put some fun themes around them, like, hey, I want to get away from my kids, or a meditation break, and someone actually led, a meditation. And one was like, hey, I just want to have a happy hour. And so one of our executives got on a boat and hosted a happy hour. So some of them were a little more scripted and some of them were just for fun, but we kind of set them all up and said, here are your options. So that's a way that you could do a quote unquote breakout after the webinar.
Can you talk about what you used so you have the webinar that's like the main meeting, and that's set up as a Zoom webinar, and then you had those breakout rooms. That I love that idea.
Yeah.
Just to get a little bit tactical, to promote all of that, did you promote it on a page on your intranet? So that people could say, okay, here's the link to the webinar, and then the webinar's over, go take a break and come back and get in a breakout room? Where did they go to easily get to
do all that? Yeah.
Like dive back into their email? Like, how did you do all that?
Yeah, so we leveraged Outlook because we use the Zoom plugin within Outlook. So what we did is our associates are pretty used to getting that webinar invitation we use an internal comms account at Paycor. So it comes out from internal comms and it says, hey, join this webinar. We do ask for the registration just so we can track our metrics and see how many people did register and then showed up. And then the breakouts, we did it the same way. We just kind of put it all on the calendar in one. And so it would give the description for each one. And so then they could choose which one they wanted to go to. And what we actually found is that when you kept it all in that one invite with the descriptions, they just bounced back and forth from each one.
It was in the actual calendar invite?
Yep, that's how we did it. We also did post this one on our intranet just because it was new. We weren't sure, is it going to be a total bust and 10 people are going to come, or is everyone going to come? And we actually had about 20% attendance at that event. So that was actually more than I was expecting. I was thinking like, oh, only like 50 people are going to do this, but it was actually very successful. I
had one other quick question. The poll, do you have to set up the questions before, or if like you think of a question in the moment, can you like quickly go in and push the polling button and say, how many people are enjoying this right now? Like, do you have to do it before or during or both?
That's a good question. You do have to set it up in advance, and it's under your settings in your webinar where you go down to polling and you add that question in, and then you can launch it when you bring up that question in your meeting. The other thing we've used like Mentimeter or Slido or Kahoot. Those are all very similar options, but again, you have to screen share that and they have to use another app to then go out and interact with that media. So just thinking through like, how do you want that experience to be? But yeah, you do have to pre-ask it.
Okay.
So Rachel, when you're talking about an all hands meeting,
with,
for all employees with your execs, how does your internal comms team kind of resource that meeting? So what are the goals?
Yeah, so it's lately it's been, COVID hit, and so they went from being this once a month thing to weekly pre-recorded videos to then, hey, we're not getting that back and forth communication. So now for the first one, we actually asked our associates, like, who do you want to hear from our executive committee? And our executive team agreed to that. And then we said, look, like the 4 of you were the top 4 votes, and so you're up. And they knew it was going to be live Q&As like flowing through. We did have some questions that were kind of already coming through in advance, so we had those kind of prepared for them in case no one asked any questions. But once that first question went out there, like folks saw that, hey, I want to ask this question to our CEO or to our CHRO or whoever was on at that session. And so that's how we kind of did that most recent live one. And then from there, we asked, the folks who were maybe not the first votes to come on our more recent one. So that's how we kind of did that. Did I answer your question fully?
I was also asking really about as far as how many team members on the comms team did, like, where it was one producer, one just looking at the Q&A box.
Yep. Yeah. Good question.
The polls, kind of how did you coordinate that with your team?
Yep. So there's actually only 2 of us. So typically what happens is that I'll run the webinar and kind of play like the producer role. So making sure that folks' videos are up. I have the computer on my end and I'm streaming like music and the slides if there are any. And then she is actually the one managing all the questions that are coming through. And then she is feeding them to our vice president, who's kind of our host on the show. And so he uses an iPad to see the questions coming through. And we just have this like Zoom chat where we're like, hey, this is the question coming through. And he will then take those and decide, which one to ask next. So he's kind of the one moderating, oh, we've gotten this question a couple times. People really want to hear that. So like now I'm going to ask it, or he'll kind of balance, which one makes sense when.
When I used to do town halls, we used to try to like give credit to like, Jane Doe in Ohio in customer care has a question. Do you do that?
Yeah, so we've been leveraging the Q&A portal within the webinar. So what happens in a Q&A is that the associate could decide to stay anonymous if they wanted. So they just check that when the question comes through. And so then we can't kind of say, hey, Kareen asked that question. If they do use their name, we do associate who they are with the question. And sometimes we have, like I said, we'll have questions ahead of time. So we'll say, hey, this question came in from our client service organization or our sales team, if we have that detail. But in the live, sometimes we can't get that fast enough. It just kind of comes through as their name. The other thing I wanted to share is that we are doing, historically, we've done a kickoff in person. So at the beginning of all of our fiscal years, we bring our sales team together and do a kickoff. And it's usually a super fun event to bring a theme together and have fun and see each other. And there's always, all the extra amenities, right? And so we're actually doing that on Zoom this year. And so I'm using Zoom, webinar, and meeting. And so we are going to do a balance of starting the day with a webinar to hear from our leaders, and then folks will break out throughout the day in Zoom meetings. And I'm going to be hosting that all via their sales portal. So if they miss, an email, it'll be on their calendars, but it'll all also be on one place. It's very similar to an intranet, but they have a sales portal specific to them. And so we're going to house all that information on one page. And so if they miss, something from the meeting, or maybe they got a call and something happened, we'll also put the recordings out there when they're over as well. So Zoom actually does that really nicely, where it'll immediately send you the recording right after the session. And so it's pretty easy to export. We always do it in Vimeo just to get the embed link quickly so that we can put it on our intranet, especially if it's something that you don't want to share broadly, or you don't want someone to just grab the link and share it with like a competitor or something along those lines. That's why we keep it on our intranet and embed it that way, so that they can't then go forward it to a friend. The other quick thing I wanted to hit on Zoom when you're going virtual is your design. So we all know this, you can't control your end user's technology connection. Obviously you can control your own, but you can control the simplicity of your design. I always recommend not using a ton of animation. So while that's super fun to do in a live event, it's not great when you're doing a virtual event because the end user's technology might not be great. And so if you're talking to something and it hasn't moved forward in the animation, it can be very confusing to your end user. The other thing to think about is the high contrast on your slides. So we are orange and white, those are our colors, right? So a lot of times we'll have a white background with the orange text, or we use a gray color as well to keep that contrast high. We have this really fun font that we use, but we try and limit that unless it can be really big and kind of easier to read, because it's just hard, right? Like they could have their screen super small. You just don't know what they're doing on their end. So thinking through some of those things. The other thing to think about is limiting what text you have on the screen. So we just recently had a meeting where it was to our directors and above population, and it was this list of like all the things going on, and you know, it just isn't a great user experience to have the microscopic font for those users to kind of like read it on the screen and see that. So thinking through those things when you're doing an event. We like to recommend not using slides so that when you drop the slides, it's just focused on the speaker. And so that you can just focus on that one thing, because it's a lot to focus on the slides and the speaker, and then they're probably putting it on a side screen. So trying to keep their engagement there. And then the last piece is really thinking through your delivery. So I know we hit this earlier, but having that host or moderator is huge. It would be really hard for us to run these meetings just with one person. You certainly could do it, but we usually like to have the breakout, like I mentioned. So I usually run, you know, the intro slides and the music. And then my colleague is usually the one managing the questions. And then we have our VP as the host. So really keeping those roles and responsibilities separate helps us have a successful event. The other pro to that is that when you're all a co-host, let's say my technology were to go out or I get disconnected or something happens, then they're still running the meeting. The meeting doesn't shut down just because I got disconnected. So that's kind of the nice thing about having the multiple hosts. The other thing I like to do if you have this opportunity is to have that second computer where you can log in as a participant, because then you can really see what your participants are seeing. And so there's a lot of things in Zoom where you can control, you know, if your audience is seeing the gallery view or how they're seeing the slides. I like to keep it away from active speaker just because sometimes if that extra audio comes through, like if it was coming through on Sarah's end right now and you were on active speaker, you would see Sarah and you wouldn't see me. And so I like to try and force my viewers to not see it that way. And so you can spotlight who's speaking, which helps avoid some of that. And that second computer allows you to really see, you know, what are the participants seeing right now. So that's helpful. The way that we get around that is that we have that internal comms account. So we had our IT team set up our internal comms account as a separate, you know, login. And so our Zoom account is set up there, but then we also have our personal Zoom accounts. So we'll host our meetings through internal comms, but then I might log in as Rachel so that I can see what the users are also seeing. If you're doing a longer event, so longer than 30 minutes, it's really key to keep it, you know, under 90 minutes if you can, and use those off times. You have to have breaks. If you don't have breaks, then they're going to get bored really fast and walk away, turn their video off, whatever it is. And then thinking through your space too. So reducing clutter. I'm using a virtual background today. You can have fun with those, but it's distracting when you see the stuff coming through. And I know we're all at home right now. So thinking through where you are, the sound, things like that. I attended a webinar where they really talk about, you know, your hair and your makeup and your clothing. So thinking about the colors that you're wearing and how you really want to represent yourself. That's all really important. The last thing is just kind of your technology with what you're using. So I'm actually using a ring light today. You can buy them on Amazon, super cheap. You can help your lighting that way if that's important to you. I'm using a Yeti microphone just for better audio, and then a Logitech web camera, which I can link all this and send it to Sarah. But if you're in a more, you know, loud space, thinking through like a headset or AirPods, also helpful for that. You just want to make sure people can hear you and not hearing all your other things. I have 2 dogs behind me. You can't see them because I have the virtual background up, but you know, if you did have something like that in the background, that's what people usually gravitate towards, and they're like, oh, cute dog. And if I don't want it to be that type of meeting, that's something to think about.
Well, Rachel, I can't thank you enough. I mean, these are all good things. I know
Yeah.
I'm taking notes to put this in a nice handy dandy checklist, but it's like events. I mean, it's all about the details, but yeah, the links to the Yeti and what ring light you use and all of that.
Definitely.
So good. I can't thank you enough.
And I'll also send you the links to kind of audio too, so you can have some fun with audio as well.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are just kind of my tips and tricks. I know we are like at time. I told you it's a lot really fast.
It is. It's so crazy how it just, yeah, there's so many details, but I think you've given us a great high level. We'll put it all in that checklist, and we just keep getting better and better. And I think it's good reminders, particularly with, you know, the new world that we're going to live in. So we'll just keep applying, you know, everything that you're teaching us here, especially for us too, you know, with our
I'm always happy to jump on a call if you want a more deep dive into something specific. We've messed around with it a lot, so I feel like I've learned a lot about Zoom over the past year.
Well, I can't thank you enough. And I know when we talked, you were like, hey, do you have any comms plans? So with the little bit of time we had, and I know we did warn everyone that we might go over a little today. You know me, I always keep an eye on that time for us. But we are going to hop into then what you needed from us, and that was some comms planning tools. So we've got 5 templates. I'm going to toss to Corrine, and we are going to continue to share our screen, and she's going to hop in and show us the first of the 5. And I know, Gina, you're going to keep time for us so we can keep moving on these. But Corrine, you want to take this part?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Can you see my screen still?
I can see you. Let me see. I'm looking at, I don't see the slide deck.
Gina, are we still on the slide? Can everybody see the slide deck?
Yeah, I can see
it from my end.
You can. Okay.
So we've got
change your view at the top if you're on gallery. Yeah.
There we go. Great. So I have a couple, 3 different plans, and they're very different as far as kind of how you work with your business partners. So the first one is a very high level plan. And when I supported HR comms for a large cable company, we had 2 full-time HR comms managers that worked on everything HR, but then I would support them with channel management. So I was in charge of our intranet and our corporate storytelling. And so we really worked on a overall calendar plan that talked about kind of where those big bucket items like open enrollment, the HR quarterly newsletter, year-end performance process. But this was a great visual to be able to socialize with business partners, you know, the diversity and inclusion team who also supports HR, as well as, you know, talent acquisition, performance management. And so this really helps to kind of level set when things were happening. And we all know that HR comms is, you know, all on a cyclical basis. However, when we get into kind of the business as usual and all the other areas of the company that our communicators must support, sometimes, you know, we tend to be more reactive than proactive. So this is a great opportunity if you're working with a business partner and you want to calendarize your communications. I suggest using this, and then you can kind of level set the expectations with them. Any questions on this template? Great, I'll move on. So I also worked for a large contract research organization, and I was an associate director of corporate communications, but I was one of only 2 people with almost 8,000 employees that were dedicated to supporting all areas of the business. So we were a very lean team, and it often was very frustrating because we wanted to produce great communications and we wanted to be able to deliver with our business partners. But sometimes just the fact that we were 2 people with one leader who had, her other responsibilities across the company, it was very difficult. So I wanted to develop some service parameters, especially with HR, since I had worked with HR in my former role. And this was a great way to kind of talk about what communications would constitute full support, what would fall under the kind of IC council and distribution support, so that I would help to give good communications counsel, help even with some messaging, but I wouldn't be writing the entire piece. But then I could also help with delivery, as far as, if we have the communications box or the HR inbox to send that email, we would be in charge of that. And then what really fell under minimal support. So those, they just may need an email template, but if it was a local communication, like a flu clinic or something that was on a local level, the HR business partner in that area could just send that out. And so this was great because we gave the communications examples, and then we were all able to really, level set and agree that this was the plan going forward. And then this was, became kind of the working template when I had a kickoff call with someone from HR. We could talk about, all these different examples, and it really helped with our planning. So any questions on IC service delivery and support? I mean, this is something that really, if you're a one-woman show or one-man show, it's really important to kind of have those parameters with your business partners, because you want to make sure that you're delivering consistent support, and when you own things and when do they support things. Great. And then this was another plan that I worked with when I had a kickoff call, or I worked with a large team to build consensus. I developed this plan. It was actually a template that we used with a company after merging. So we became from an 8,000 person company to a 21,000 person company. And they had worked with an outside consultancy group that managed a lot of their IC. And so this was a great template that I was able to leverage. And you're really, especially for those large communications projects, building that overview and making sure that that is all set and that you're agreed upon kind of what that overview is. And then looking at the communications considerations, what's the complexity of the project? Where do the supporting details need to happen? And does, your business partner need to kind of fill you in on that? And then the communications objectives. So, what is the objective or the goal of the communication initiative? And then your strategy. So where will your message cascade? What are your touch points? Will this, include like face-to-face manager meetings, virtual huddles? Are you going to, make sure that your HR business partners or people leaders have all the information going forward with FAQs and talking points, and then delivering that message to a larger employee group? And then looking at your target audiences too for that cascade. And then I have all the supporting materials that you would need for that communication, so that your kickoff call can be shaped around what, as a communicator, your team will deliver to that business partner. I think that's really important. And then Gina, we can go to the next slide. And then this is where we get to the timeline. So a lot of these communications plans, they're really predicated just on the timeline, but the timeline should be supporting all of the other pieces. And so that's where we get to the timing, the tactic, and the responsibility. And then this could really be a playbook. So you could have, your key messages, your talking points, your FAQs, all, in this document. You could even put your results and your metrics. If you're looking at open rates and, what the employee response or the call to action was. And then your wrap up and post plan feedback, so that especially if this is something that you repeat year after year, or that you have this playbook and it's all finished and you can kind of see, what went well and what needs to be tweaked for the next time. So any questions on that? Great. And then we had Connie Mays, who is the senior communications manager at for Blue Cross and Blue Shield for part of different states, actually had the same type of plan, but just in a different format. So it was the same thing, the situation analysis, that those objectives, the key messages, the audience, that overall strategy, but just in a different plan. So if you wanted to kind of narrow or parse, down that content into kind of some easy to understand bullets and didn't want it like in a narrative form, this is a great planning document as well.
All right.
Great. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about her plans.
And what's funny about this is when Rachel asked us for a plan, and then I went to Corinne, it's like, well, what kind of plan? And so I think you can use all these, when you're, the CEO asks for a plan, they probably don't want all the details. So you can get away with giving the high level, but yet when you gotta work with all the other departments, then we've got now a plan for a specific project. And so I wanted to share really this integrated comms plan, which is for promotion. So this is how Gina and I and our team, because we've got interns on our team as well, where we're trying to coordinate social. And so we have this in a Google Doc is what we use, and we can link to where the image is going to be if somebody's working on art, our UTM link. So this sort of keeps it all together. And we've set an internal system of kind of red, yellow, green. And when it's green, we know that it's gone live and posted in Buffer. So this is sort of a way that we can integrate our team into actually doing the work and getting it in there. Other things that I've put in this doc, because we are working, with different skill sets and levels, is, tips and, for posting friendly reminders and, different hashtags and things like that. But I kind of plan out the months with what's our key topics, what's our campaigns, what's our general schedule. So that's also in this plan. The other thing, and this is more external, but you could use it, is this is another editorial calendar that I've used. This is in Excel, and I kind of have used this one to put the week's theme and then all of the channels that we're using, and then the success metric to see, hey, which posts are resonating, with our audience. So this is an Excel doc. And then the last one that we shared with Rachel is this message map. And this has helped me tremendously. So, and another way I think to position that internal communicator as the leader in kind of guiding the senior leaders into creating what are the 3 key messages around whatever new project that we're going to do. And the way that we've developed our key messages is with 3 key questions. So what do you want your audience to know? And in this case, it's about a product or a campaign we're launching, but yours could be an initiative. What does your audience want to hear? And then what could they get wrong? So that's sort of has always helped me frame and get my head wrapped around how do I write these key messages. But we've got this even in a template and in a doc. So those all working together, again, when you say comms plan, it could mean any one of those things. But I think having them all and sort of knowing how you and your team work and to build those really puts a nice polish and positions, I think, that internal communicator as a leader, getting above the work so that you can filter things. Like I loved Corinne's service plan so that you can be the keeper of your own team so that people are not just continually throwing things at you. I just thought all of them working together were so well done, but we will send those in a follow-up. We're going to send them in 2 ways. And I'll tell you a third that you have the option for, because Rachel and I were talking about this. You know, you get stuff off the internet and then it's a PDF and then we can't copy and paste. Like, just give me a link to a Google Doc that I can make a copy out of so I can be on my way to use it. So with the group, we'll send them as Word documents. We've heard a lot of people use Word as opposed to Gmail. I'll also send an actual link to this deck in case you just want a visual of it. But if you need a Google Doc, I'll make a copy of it and put your name on it. I thought 100 people getting the same doc, somebody's going to screw this up. So just email me and tell me what you need so that you don't have to be screwing around with this stuff. And then the last thing is we are going to be sending out a survey. We are getting ready to plan our second half of the year for all things Internal Comms Pro. We've heard people say, start Mastermind, start peer circles. We want to have more accountability to dive deeper. So we want to really see where our team can channel our efforts into really getting you the things that you actually need. So that survey is really critical. If you wouldn't mind taking just a few minutes and giving us your feedback on the things that we're doing well, that we might not be, where we can grow, we would love that. So that kind of wraps up this series. We'll start back in August. We're going to take July to get our ducks in a row, to have some forums and, like I said, some feedback sessions to inform our work. But anybody have anything, last thoughts? Rachel, anything that you'd like to say about these? When you asked for a comms plan, you didn't know we were going to shoot back with 10,000 things.
No, it's been great. I really appreciate you guys jumping on a call. I feel like we're scrambling. So it is nice to have something where you're like, okay, I can visualize this for what we're doing and kind of plug and play.
Yeah. So, well, I'm grateful for your stuff too. And we'll look forward to coming up with our next series. And with that, look for the follow-up email. And thanks, Corrine, my co-host, Gina, our producer, and Rachel, our treasured guest, for being part of our collective today.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Bye.